If you are a fan of the musical Dear Evan Hansen, then today is going to be a good day, and here is why. I'm about to tell you all about the brand new non-replica production. Oh my god, hey, it's Mickey Jo here, coming to you on location from the Lace Market Hotel in Nottingham, who have been kind enough to host me and my stagey fiancé Erin James during our trip here to see the non-replica UK tour of Dear Evan Hansen. But what exactly does that mean? Well, let me tell you. This is a brand new production of the Tony and Olivier award-winning musical that is different to the version that you might know. It has a different creative team. That is what we mean by non-replica. It has a new director, it has new designs, it has a different cast to the production that you may have seen before in the West End or on Broadway, and it has different creative elements and a few sort of minor changes. I'm going to tell you all about the differences between this and previous productions. I'm also going to tell you what I thought of this cast, their performances, and the overall piece. I'm also going to let you know what I think of Dear Evan Hansen as a show, because I don't know if I've ever formally reviewed it with a full video here on YouTube. I think when it was opening in the West End, I was still writing reviews for a written blog, and obviously now I talk to tiny people inside a camera. So that is what I'm going to be doing today, and I'm very excited to let you know about it. This was both of our first visit to Nottingham and the Nottingham Playhouse. Big thanks to the venue for hosting us, as well as the Lace Market Hotel here in Nottingham for having us during our stay. Can recommend both of those places. In fact, we've had such a lovely time in Nottingham. I'm pretty sure I took the programme from the show, put it down on a table in a Creams dessert cafe in Nottingham and have left it there. So, go to Creams in Nottingham and see if you can find a lucky Dear Evan Hansen programme if you would like one. For now though, let me tell you what I thought of the show. Of course, I'm also very intrigued to hear what you thought of the show if you have been to see this production already. It has just began, but it's about to tour all around the UK, so if you're seeing this video a little later in the run, let us know what you thought of the show. And specifically, I'm curious if you've seen the original production, how you thought this compared, because that's largely what we're going to be talking about in today's review. Finally, if you would like to see and hear more of my reviews, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel where they are available as videos, or go listen to them on podcast platforms and follow me over there. You can also find more of my theatre thoughts over on Instagram, TikTok, and the app formerly known as Twitter. I nearly called it X. I can't do it. You can find me on all of those as MickeyJoTheatre. For now though, let's talk Dear Evan Hansen. So let me begin by giving you a little bit of background to the show and this specific production, and how we got to here, and why we have a non-replica version touring the UK, and what that means. So, Dear Evan Hansen, Tony Award-winning musical. It was on Broadway first. It transferred from off-Broadway. It's an original story based on a handful of true events. It features a book by Stephen Levinson and a score by the now EGOT recipients Benj Pasek and Justin Paul. FYI, there might be spoilers for this plot in this review, so if you haven't seen the show yet, if you don't want to know what happens in the show, I would suggest going to see it first before you watch this review. But in terms of the plot, it is about a young student named Evan Hansen who struggles with anxiety and depression, and he ends up trapped in this lie when a classmate of his commits suicide, and through a combination of misinterpretation of a note as well as Evan's the eagerness to try and, traverse this situation gracefully, and his increasing eagerness to then, get closer to this unexpected family, and this, this warmth that he has never really had, and this comfort that he has never really known. He ends up lying and exaggerating any kind of a friendship that he had with the late Connor Murphy. This whole thing snowballs into a situation beyond his control, not helped by, his continued lying, as well as the way that it's being shown on social media. He ends up in a relationship with Connor Murphy's sister Zoe, and the whole thing comes to a dramatic conclusion. One of the most interesting elements of which is the class disparity between this new family that he is welcomed into, who are wealthier. Not that that necessarily made a difference for them when it came to trying to take care of their son and his turbulent mental health, and Evan's own comparatively working class single parent background. This is also one of the reasons some people have some mixed feelings about the show, is because you have these positive anthems like You Will Be Found, which out of context are very inspirational, and within the context of the show are part of a lie, are part of a deceit. In terms of the show's material, though, I actually think the book is incredibly strong. There are some really fantastic book scenes in this show, and the score is also brilliant. Like, Benj Pasek and Justin Paul are multi-award winners for a reason. Yes, it sounds a little bit Christian rock, and yes, there are some moments where, it just offers lyrically some kind of generic platitudes, but there are also moments where it cuts quite deeply to the core of a lot of, the mental health experience and the experience of social anxiety and of depression and of loneliness. And there are many parts of this show that resonate hugely with a lot of people. There's a reason that this show enduringly has a lot of fans and that this really emotionally affects people. And it's because of these lyrics. It's because of this material. It is best known among musical theatre fans for such songs as Waving Through a Window and You Will Be Found. And a huge amount of its early success had to do with the iconic Tony Award-winning performance of its original leading man, Ben Platt, who reprised his role in a film adaptation. More on that momentarily. The success of the show guaranteed it a West End run. The production came over here. It won the Olivier Award for Best New Musical. Leading man Sam Tutty also won an Olivier Award for his soul-bearing performance. He played Evan Hansen throughout the show's West End run, which, much like the Broadway run, was interrupted by a little bit of the world ending in between. I am talking, of course, about the theatres having to shut down during COVID-19, which, despite the show's huge pre-pandemic success, was one of the instruments of its undoing, because when we came back from the pandemic, there was this discernible shift in audience mood, and people didn't necessarily want to go and see something that was, ostensibly hard-hitting and potentially depressing and affecting. People wanted uplifting and distracting. They didn't want to be talking about the turbulent themes and the difficult mental health everyone had just been experiencing more acutely for the past however many months and years. And you noticed this in the show's marketing as well, where pre-pandemic, they had been showing like Ben Platt performing the scene leading into Waving Through a Window, and it had been like, oh, he's like this troubled teen who's really having a hard time, and he's different, and he's going through all this stuff. Post-pandemic, they really leaned into the You Will Be Found of it all, and just the uplifting and positive, and they're like, this is a happy show, at least for moments. But that didn't really work. Combine that with a troubled reception to the film adaptation. Now, the film, for whatever you think about it, never really managed to capture the same essence as the stage production. They went with a very different tone, and it came under fire also because of the casting of Ben Platt, who reprised his stage performance on screen, and a lot of people said that he was visibly too old to convincingly play a teenager on film that many years later. All of which seemed to kind of damage the reputation of Dear Evan Hansen. I also think it was quite specifically a product of its time when it first emerged, and, when it was on Broadway, it perfectly coincided with a lot of the conversations that we were having on and about social media and about mental health themes and destigmatizing mental health. And, both that conversation and social media itself moved so fast and adapted and changed so quickly that the conversations we were having by a few years later, by post-pandemic, when we'd had a lot of time on social media and a lot of time talking and reflecting on mental health, the conversation had changed just enough that I think some of the perspectives depicted within Dear Evan Hansen felt a little bit outdated. It felt like the sort of perhaps slightly generic message of you will be found and, it gets better, and messages akin to those weren't really nuanced enough for the conversations that we were now having. In any case, Dear Evan Hansen subsequently closed both on Broadway and in the West End. Now, by this time, its North American success had already given it a North American tour, as well as a Canadian production. These were both the same as the original production directed by Michael Greif. But in the UK, it hadn't yet toured, and so the question on everybody's minds when it closed in the West End was, are we going to get a UK tour of Dear Evan Hansen? And a few years later, the answer turned out to be yes, but not as you know it. And that's because the production that is now set to tour the UK, which just opened last night in Nottingham, is non-replica. And as I mentioned at the start, this means different creative team, this means different designs, new director, new choreographer, new creative elements. And within that, they have not only the opportunity to restage the show, which can be as simple as, people coming on from different entrances, or as complex as like this number is now an elaborate dream sequence. They also have the opportunity to redesign the show, iconic blue polo shirt be damned, but they also have the opportunity to reconceive many other elements of it as well. And it's possible when we get a non-replica production that, you know, within the confines of the material staying largely the same, it will adapt and change slightly. So let me tell you all about those changes. Now, having built this up as if it's going to be a substantially different version, it may or may not disappoint you to learn that it's not. It's a very familiar Evan Hansen. If you were to show this to AI, it would be able to tell you that this is Dear Evan Hansen, because it is really not too far removed from the original production. Die-hard fans may tell you that there are a vast number of changes, but in terms of the scope of what they could have done to update, to change, to reconceive this show, they really haven't stepped too far away from Michael Greif's original direction. Let me tell you more about why. So the essence and the mood of the show and the idea of its staging is still largely the same. We begin with Evan, rather than being sat on his bed typing at a laptop, he is sat at like a desk or the breakfast table, and then his mum comes in and interrupts him. He's dressed slightly differently to the version that we know. She's dressed slightly differently to the version that we know, but it's the same interaction, it's the same scene. As a big picture commentary, it felt like it was just kind of different enough that it was technically a new version, but it did not broadly depart from the original that you might recognize. Most of these scenes occurred in the same places. In fact, there were a few staging moments that were almost identical to the original that didn't necessarily need to be. This was where I thought they actually could have, done something a little more interesting, a little new with the material in something like For Forever. It still begins with him sat in almost exactly the same place at the Murphys' dinner table, and then he steps away to be downstage right to sing this song, just like he did in the original version. And this is a song about him telling a story about this imagined perfect day that he had with his friend Connor. And I think there's more that you could do with this. As he is telling them this story, you could be using physical theatre. We have an ensemble in this version, more on them momentarily, and they could be like carrying him around. They could be doing something interesting. We could be doing more storytelling rather than just having him stand there and belt out another ballad, which is something, if you don't know, Evan Hansen does a lot of. And though we don't see the iconic blue polo shirt, technically he still wears a blue striped top at the beginning of the show. He still wears stripes for most of it. He wears different coloured polo shirt. I will speak about the costumes when I tell you about some of the other characters, but again, it's just not a huge departure. His cast looks a little bulkier as well. I think this is because they actually made the casts fresh for every performance in the West End and on Broadway, and they sold them at the flea market subsequently. I have one in my home, but this one, I dare say, I would bet that this is a little bigger because it's one that he's able to get on and off without them having to remake it at every single tour stop, which is smart and more sustainable. I mentioned most of the scenes took place in the same locations. There are a couple of differences with this. So Big, So Small, the song that Heidi, Evan's mum, sings to him in the second act, rather than taking place on the sofa in their family home, instead it takes place in his bedroom and they sit together on his bed. This was a change that I thought worked. It just makes it that little bit more personal. And were this not another similarity with the original production, I would have suggested that it actually would have been a good idea for him to start the thing on his bed, just to give us that sense of like symmetry and coming back to that place where he felt very uncertain and insecure, because then it's like this sense of constancy when he has the scene with Zoe where their relationship has progressed in the second act and they're singing Only Us. That again takes place in his bedroom. So if that could be a through line, that would be great. But it felt like in the beginning, we're just moving it from his bedroom to the kitchen for the sake of being different. And that's a lot of what this production feels like, is doing different things for the sake of it so that we're not encroaching on that original version. And that's something worth considering here as well, especially if you're a fan who is missing certain elements of the original production and you're wondering why they didn't include things. They're not necessarily able to, because that would be, I guess, whatever the version is of copyright. They would be utilizing something that they don't have the legal rights to because it's not their direction, it's not their choreography, it's not their design. They are licensing purely the show, which means the material, the script, the songs. That being said, one tiny little detail from the original I did miss is during the song Sincerely Me. This is just a cute little moment. They are imagining Connor and he is brought to life, and the actor playing Connor appears on stage and sings his material as they are composing this email. And as Jared and Evan are rewriting it, he rephrases certain things. And there's a line where he says, if I stop smoking crack, and then Evan's like, crack, and then Jared rewrites it to, if I stop smoking pot. And in the original version, the actor playing Connor would characterize those differently. Like he would sing the crack line like he was on crack, and then he would sing the pot line like he was smoking pot, and they were two distinctly different moods. And we didn't get that in this one, and I just missed that little thing because it would always make me laugh. Speaking of Connor though, one of my favourite changes to the show, one of the few additions that they've made in terms of staging, is a moment where he arrives during Words Fail. Unless this happened in the original version, but I do not remember it. He walks on and joins his family, who have all slowly moved to one side of the stage, apart from Evan, while he is admitting this dreadful revelation that he has been lying to them. And then Connor enters and sits among his family, the memory of Connor, the ghost of Connor, whatever. Now, I mentioned I would talk about the ensemble, and I've already seen some people discussing this on TikTok and saying that, like, it changes the identity of the show or it spoils the show, whatever. The actual cast, the actual company, is smaller than previous versions of the show. There are just more of them on stage. Hear me out. So there are a few fewer covers, understudy performers for the principal characters. This show has not previously featured an ensemble as such on stage, only those principal characters. But in this version, the understudies, who would normally be like standing by backstage or whatever, possibly singing vocals into a vocal booth, I think, on the original production for songs like You Will Be Found and Waving Through a Window. Instead, they have a few moments where they come on stage and are like students walking around, or they move set pieces, or in a couple of numbers, they perform a little bit of choreography and they sing out Louise. Those moments are in Waving Through a Window, when we see them kind of like swirling around Evan as he's in this high school world, and we have lockers moving past and they are upstage. They could be utilized a little bit more effectively. Here I'll explain why when I tell you about the set. We see them again during You Will Be Found. I think this is actually a really good choice because this is the first moment where it gets bigger than Evan. It gets bigger than him and Connor and Jared and the Murphys, and it becomes about social media. This is also the first time we see a whole bunch of screens around him, which was a big feature of the original set design, but they only bring in the world of social media at this point in this production, which I think is a great choice because this is a turning point. This is a shift, and this is where it suddenly goes online and it gets bigger and it gets impossible to control. And that feels initially like a great and inspiring and powerful thing, and it comes to be a little bit of a dangerous one by the second act. This is when we see the ensemble coming on stage together again, which is when Connor's suicide note is leaked to the Connor Project Facebook page, I guess, and we see them coming on and delivering lines that we have always heard in the show as pre-recorded from these social media voices. Instead, they are said live by members of the ensemble as they begin to criticize and, I guess, cyberbully and harass and dox the Murphy family, because from the story that they have been told, from the lie that they have been fed via Evan Hansen and the Connor Project, it seems like the Murphy family is negligent in the death of their son with the revelations delivered by the suicide note. This, I also think, has a lot of potency to it. I like them being on stage at this point. However, the one that I really cannot get behind, they come back on stage at the end of the show for the finale moment. And bear in mind, the last time we have seen this collection of like young adults is how they're portrayed, is them harassing, doxing the Murphy family. A few short scenes later, they enter into this orchard with the Murphy family stood on stage with them, and they just come in going, all we see is light for forever. And I'm like, you were just being so aggressive and so toxic. If they'd got changed, if they were presented as different characters, if they didn't seem to have specific identities, I don't think I would mind as much. But the idea of these like cyberbullies coming back into this orchard, having just been terrible, and then being like, all we see is light. I'm like, no, shut down this toxic positivity. I mean, it's not unlike social media to go from one to the next, but still, I also wonder what happens when like 2 or 3 of these company members have to go on in their roles. One of them is the alternate Evan Hansen, who was cast through a talent search on TikTok, I believe. So that, I guess, would reduce the size of that ensemble. And then I don't know how many people there would be to like come and stand and give you Even When the Dark Comes Crashing Through, because that will hit differently if there's only 2 of them doing it, I'm telling you. Speaking of You Will Be Found, just before I tell you about the set design, because I know you're curious about this, Heidi Hansen appears during You Will Be Found and is very smiley and singing along. And from what I remember of the original version, Heidi has this cross, unless this was later in the show and I'm getting confused. Heidi has this cross and like acknowledges what she's seeing with Evan's speech appearing on social media, and she's puzzled by it because the last thing he has told her is that he did not know Connor, even though the word Connor is written largely on his cast because he has a broken arm. He tells her it was a different Connor and she doesn't need to be concerned. I can't remember if this is the moment we see her cross the stage and look concerned, or if that comes later with the release of the suicide note or whatever. But in any case, it does not make sense whatsoever for her to be in You Will Be Found, for her to be participating in this message, unless it's meant to be out of character, out of world, and just generic, because she shouldn't be acknowledging his video then, because weeks pass, or at least a certain amount of time passes between the first and the second act, and during one of the earliest scenes of the second act, she says she's just seen this thing online and she speaks to him about it for the first time. Even if she learns about it during You Will Be Found, her reaction shouldn't be a positive one. Her reaction should be a surprised and concerned one, because she is finding out that he lied to her about the friendship that he had with Connor. There's also one line in the second act where Heidi confronts Evan about the Connor project and him being listed as the president, and he has a line to her when he says, because I lied, or because it was a lie, and it's then qualified with, when I said I wasn't friends with him, because I was, and he is lying in that moment because that's not actually the truth, Ellen. But there's a pause that you could put in there where it feels like he's about to tell her the truth, and then we find out he's still lying. But instead we just kind of speedboat on through that, and he says, because it was a lie when I said I didn't know him. And I think a more effective reading of that would be to say, because it was a lie, and then the audience goes, he said it, and he's like, when I said I didn't know him. And then it's like he's made the choice to, in that moment, he's gone, am I going to tell the truth, or am I going to lie? Am I going to let my mother know? And then he decides to keep lying. We see him making a decision to at that point, which is not really what happens in the beginning. Everyone's very critical of Evan Hansen and say that he's a bad person for lying to this family. And he truly trips and falls into it. He is truly like guided into it by Jared and by the Murphys. And everyone so desperately wants this to be the truth that he ends up trying to do the right thing and going down the wrong path. But by the time we're in the second act, he is making this choice, and that's different. Now let's talk about the set design. Now in the original, it was sort of a black box staging with different set elements that would come in and out. We would see Evan's bedroom, we would see the Murphy household, we would get a suggestion of high school. We would have all of these different screens around them reflecting the social media world that Evan was living in. Like I said, they don't bring in the social media element until the end of the first act, which is the first time it's really relevant to him. And I like that because it makes him feel a little more isolated. It doesn't feel like he's in this busy world. It feels like his world is quiet and alone. What we have instead is these not dissimilar sliding screens, but rather than being video screens, digital screens, they are frosted glass. And we are riffing on this idea, design-wise, of waving through a window and him being separated from the rest of the world. I mentioned that when the ensemble were used in Waving Through a Window, the song, that they could be used more effectively. What I mean by this is they enter the upstage behind this frosted glass, and we just see like this outline of them. They are blurred to him and he can't get to them. He can't reach them because there's frosted glass in the way, but it's a metaphor, everybody. However, they have him walk behind these frosted glass windows so that he's then with them, and then they come down and they're with him, and they don't really use it as the barrier that it could be depicted as a little bit more effectively. But I like the idea. I like the design motif. There's another moment where it's used to slightly puzzling effect, which is during the song Requiem. Now we have Zoe, who begins the song sat on the Murphys' sofa. In a different room, we have Cynthia Murphy singing about her late son while sat on his bed. A lot of scenes take place in Connor's bedroom in this version, I think more so than in the original production, which I thought was very effective. But in this moment specifically, Larry Murphy, his father, is reluctant to enter the room, so he steps out and he steps behind a frosted glass screen to indicate he's walking down the corridor, but he's about to start singing, so we need to see him while he's singing. So he steps behind this screen, and then the screen moves to reveal him, and then he like walks in front of it, and then it moves again behind it. It's a very confusing scene, and we're trying to depict multiple different rooms within a large, expensive house at this point, and it's just a little bit clumsy. There are also these mirrored elements to the set, and beyond like reflecting your choices back at you and like dealing with morality, I don't really know what these represent or what these provide necessarily. One final thing on these windows is that they slide out on a couple of occasions during the first act to show people stood elevated behind them. We see Heidi Hansen appearing on the phone to her son while he is finishing his Dear Evan Hansen note in the computer lab. We see Alana appearing there on another occasion, but this isn't used consistently. And this is one of the direction choices that I think may have been the most frustrating, is there are many moments in this script where you have characters who are either messaging each other or video calling each other or on the phone to each other, and they have these scenes together, but they aren't actually in the same location. And this gets depicted multiple different ways throughout the show. It's the inconsistency that bothers me here, because I like that idea of the screens sliding out and you seeing them behind these windows, because there's a separation and there is a disconnect. There are other moments where you have two characters on opposite sides of the stage who begin a conversation at laptops and then stand up, walk away from those laptops and face each other and look at each other. And not only does this make it harder for us to infer that they are having an online conversation, but it also breeds a little bit too much familiarity and a little too much closeness between them. By the time we get to the second act, Evan and Jared and Alana feel like the closest and the best of friends, and even though they are collaborating together on the Connor project, that isn't necessarily how they should feel. Each of them is still, in their own way, quite isolated and alone. More to the point, having them step out of their own worlds into Evan's and then having them disappear behind his bed when his mum enters to indicate that he can just turn them off because they're only on a digital device, kind of steps on the use of Connor as a memory, as a ghost orbiting around Evan's life doing a similar thing. That starts to look exactly the same, and it's not. So I've been talking about the changes to the production, but through that I've been talking to you about what I think about this production as well, and this direction by Adam Penford. And my overall response to it was that it felt a little unemotional. And I have enjoyed this show historically. I wouldn't describe myself as a huge fan of this show. I think there are a lot of things within the material I previously found to be more affecting. One of the biggest losses is with Larry Murphy's arc. This was always the thing that I think affected me the most profoundly. There was a moment in the middle of You Will Be Found where he had this sudden turning point, where he had this breakdown. He had been repressing and just ignoring so much of his grief for his son. And we see a big shift in his character and in the whole family dynamic leading into the second act. And that, in spite of the negative connotations of everything that he did, was also because of the impact of Evan Hansen on their lives. And it was this You Will Be Found moment that always made me cry. This was the most hard-hitting, I thought, moment in the show, and it's not that they do an alternative to that in this version, they simply just don't do it. And going into this, I said I wasn't as concerned about what they take away as intrigued by what they add, and it felt like we were taking away things that they didn't have the rights to, and we just didn't add enough. Like I said, I like that moment where Connor comes back. I would like for there to have been more of that. I wanted more innovation, more originality, more creativity, rather than just doing a version that's different enough so we don't have to pay royalties to the original creatives. I'm sorry to the work of everyone who was involved in this. There was still, creativity and thought that went into it. I just wanted it to be a bolder step away from that original production, because what we end up with is something that feels a little bit thin, a little bit one-dimensional, a little bit generic. I would describe this as the Disney Channel Evan Hansen, where everything was played a little more for light laughs. We just didn't really go to that place of darkness, especially in the first act. This got better in the second. Things began to progress a little more. It became a little more hard-hitting, but it felt quite light. It felt like a mental health show for teens, basically. That's what the first act started to feel like. It felt like a show about how, school can be hard and things like life can be difficult sometimes, but it'll get better. And to a certain extent, this is a criticism that back of the chair is way higher than I thought it was. I was attempting a casual lead. And to a certain extent, this is also a criticism I have of the original production and of Michael Greif's direction. And I don't know if the show has ever owned up to its own complicated depictions of everything that happens within. I think the show often tries to present this very kind of pre-packaged positive outlook on mental health, like everything is going to get better, everyone will eventually not be alone, no one is really alone, and they don't really contend with some of the harsh realities of anxiety and of depression. There are moments of the show that step towards it, but it never gets all the way there. It's an inherently adolescent perspective on the thing, perhaps because of Evan Hansen being the protagonist. But when you're dealing with such difficult themes, I think you have a responsibility to also deliver the nuance, and their commitment to the positivity of it all kind of inhibits their ability to do that. Now let's talk about the performances. So Ryan Kopel plays Evan Hansen. He was previously seen as Davy in Newsies in London, and he sounds fantastic. He has a great voice. There is something about his vocal placement, which is a little different to Evan Hansen's that we've heard before. It's just that little bit more nasal, that little bit more pingy, and it comes from a slightly different place. And this I believe is just how he sings, but in a strange way, it keeps it from feeling a little bit authentic. Again, it just feels that slightly bit more Disney Channel. Not that he doesn't sound great, he does, and it's a great vocal tone, but there's just something about certain phrases that he sings in the likes of Words Fail, where it just feels a little too placed to feel honest. Like when he's singing, I never let them see the worst of me, it feels a little bit pitched there rather than feeling like it's coming from the gut. It just feels like it's placed a little bit higher, if that makes sense. And again, not that he doesn't sound great, and not that he isn't completely committing to this characterization. And this is a very draining role, both physically and emotionally. And he gives a very believable depiction and portrayal of someone who is incredibly anxious, incredibly nervous, and like constantly overthinking everything. More often than not, this takes us to a comedic place, especially in the first act, because he's jittery, because he's quirky, and he lands all of those comedy moments around it very well, like when he is constantly being awkward and clumsy with his interactions with Zoe. He plays in the comedy of that really well and doesn't necessarily access the inherent darkness. He doesn't feel like someone who is really suicidal in some of those moments in the first act, which are revelations that unfold later in the show. What he plays really well, perhaps better than anything else, is the resentment with his mother. This dynamic works the best for me I have ever seen it. This very difficult, strained relationship between Evan and Heidi. She is working as a nurse and she's taking classes to become a paralegal, which makes her very physically unavailable to him. She's also trying to make sure that he is taking care of himself, and she's worried, but she doesn't want to do too much, and she's struggling with all of this, and he's not really telling her what he needs, but there's also this palpable resentment there that she's not available to him as much as he would like. And in the moment where they make plans together and they plan to have a taco night and go through college essay questions, the enthusiasm that Ryan plays for that is more so than I have ever seen before. He gets so excited about it that it's even more heartbreaking when she forgets and ends up cancelling their plans. And you can then see the disappointment. And both his and her reactions in the second act when she discovers how much time he's been spending at the Murphys and they offer to allocate him the money they'd set aside for Connor's college tuition. That is the best scene in the entire show. That scene in the second act, everyone is on their game in that scene, and everyone's characterizations works best in that scene. Ryan also does a great job singing Words Fail. I will say, having said what I said about his vocal placement, I do think in terms of the range, this is one of the most comfortable Evan Hansen sings I have ever heard. Like, there's a huge amount of passion and emotion poured into the thing, but in terms of just like the notes, he's really comfortably singing the score, which is going to bode well over a long tour. And while we are talking about vocal stamina, let us talk about Alice Fern. Alice Fern, who you may know from Come From Away, from Wicked, she is playing Heidi Hansen, and she pitches this really well. I think this is a very difficult role to get right because she cares very deeply for her son, but there is this strain in their relationship and there is this frustration, and she takes it very personally when she finds out how close he's become with the Murphys, and this, hits her in an insecurity as a single parent, as a lower income household single parent, because they're offering her, a job opportunity potentially. They're offering to pay for Evan's college tuition that she's unable to do. She feels inadequate there, and she lashes out at her son because of that and sings Good For You. This is Alice Fern's best moment in the show, I think. Not only the way that she sings this song, growling through this song, which I've heard her alphabet, I saw that coming from a million miles off, I thought it was great, but the way that she can play this anger and this frustration that still has a care underneath it, it's very easy for this relationship to just sort of not really work because she has to play these difficult emotions and this frustration, and we don't have many opportunities to really see the closeness between the two of them until right at the end of the show when she sings a song called So Big, So Small. But I thought she pitched the whole relationship very, very well. And I liked her rendition of So Big, So Small as well. I liked it when she was connected to him. There is a staging choice I don't agree with, because they are sat together on his bed, and then during the climax of the song, she's singing, I knew there would be moments that I'd miss. She steps away from him and she walks down stage and she has a moment. And there's a subtle riff in there, there's a subtle option up in there, which is normally things I love from Alice Fern. I loved it in Come From Away, I loved it in Wicked. It doesn't feel emotionally honest here because she steps away from him. I don't even know if I would care about the option up if she was to just grab him and like hold his head and like pull him close to her. But it's the stepping away I can't really justify here because it separates them. And it's the most emotionally wrought moment of the song. And he's in despair. He's having a breakdown. And this song is a very long way around to the idea that it's eventually going to get better and that eventually this will be a distant memory. But to convince him of that, she tells him a really traumatizing story about the time that his dad left, which is one of, I guess, like the key ingredients to his loneliness and to his discontent. And so he comes in devastated and broken, and she's like, hey, remember that time your dad left? Let me just go stand over here for a second and sing this really big song. And she's singing the lines like, your mum isn't going anywhere, your mum is staying right here, with the exception to that being when I have to go and sing my big solo at the front of the stage. I just don't think she should walk away from him at that moment. That's all. One entirely frivolous detail I have about Alice Fern, and a little bit about Ryan as well, is I think both of their hair looks too good. Alice specifically, like, they need to, either she needs to style it up or something, it needs to look messy, or they need to give her an uglier wig. I'm very sorry to say her hair is too stunning, and we're not really sensing the class disparity between the Hansens and the Murphys. We get told about it, we don't really see it because there's not enough set to indicate that, and she's dressed for work, you know, she's wearing hospital scrubs because she's going to work, and so we can infer from context that we have different social backgrounds here. But the hair, I think, needs to be a little different, and the same with Ryan's hair as Evan Hansen. I don't know if they're trying to make it look messy. It looks very precisely done, and I just don't know if this feels like a character who is going to spend that much time doing his hair in the morning. I don't know. Do you know who I think is damn near perfect in their characterization, maybe giving the best portrayal of this character I have ever seen, is Lauren Conroy as Zoe Murphy. And it's subtle, but it's this just kind of sardonic and like a little bit cool and a little bit edgy and a little bit emotionally indifferent and guarded. It's very subtle, which does, but it feels very nuanced. It feels very real, and her reactions throughout the thing, just watching her face in so many of these other scenes, just brilliant. She was recently seen as Jasmine in Babies the Musical. She was also Little Red Riding Hood in Into the Woods at Theatre Royal Bath. She's a very exciting rising star, I think, but she is exceptional in this. Watching her during the early moments of Words Fail is brilliant. I don't know if her and Ryan ever really feel like they are comfortably in a relationship. Their Only Us is cute, but it always feels like there is this enduring awkwardness between them, which there is. Like, it's not the easiest or most comfortable of relationships, and he is, you know, awkward through it as well. This has always been a factor. I just don't know if I ever necessarily believed her shift towards him, for better or for worse. This could also be a good choice, I guess, because it kind of foreshadowed their incompatibility or the inherent dishonesty of their romantic involvement. Let's talk about Helen Anker and Richard Hurst as Cynthia Murphy and Larry. Now, Richard, I think, struggles with that turning point being excised from the show, because he then has this gear shift from the first act to the second, which isn't really justified or signposted by anything for him as an actor. I enjoy his interactions very much with Evan during the song To Break in a Glove. That's a song that's really grown on me since I first heard it, because I think it's very rich for his character. And I thought the changes in their relationship and the frustrations and the difficulty between them in response to the death of their son were all very well played. I don't know if that immediate moment of grief, I mean, he's in denial, but certainly for Helen as Cynthia, I don't know if it felt distraught enough. When we meet her after Connor's death, traditionally, we find her completely broken, and instead she feels sort of almost as short-tempered as Larry does. There's a line exchange between them where he asks her to show Evan the note, and she immediately says, "I'm going as fast as I can." And I think it would serve the material better for her to play it as just more in total despair at that moment, because we find out that they are both processing their grief in very different ways. I think she needs to feel like she's in that different place. In the rest of the supporting cast, I really enjoyed Cillian Thomas Lefebvre as Connor Murphy. I thought he had some really effective moments, particularly when returning and sort of haunting Evan Hansen. I also thought Tom Dickerson was very funny as Jared. Both he and Vivian Panker really brilliantly foreshadowed their own loneliness. This is a big revelation of the second act, that these characters that present as outgoing and successful are in many ways just as isolated emotionally as Evan is. They feel just as lonely, they experience the same sadnesses, and I believed truly both of their little sections of the song Good For You, particularly with Alana. This is something I've always struggled with, because the nature of her lyrics always feels a little bit audacious in that song, because she's been so strong a proponent of the Connor project and kind of dragging Evan into it, that when she sings like, "I hope you had a blast while you dragged me along," it always feels a little bit disingenuous. But the way Vivian played the scene leading into it, I believed that she believed what she was saying, and that's really all that matters. I do think, again, that a lot of her material was played more for comedy, and we laugh, and she's a funny character while she's talking about acquaintances, and she's talking about all of her extracurriculars, and she's clearly exaggerating her relationship with Connor, not unlike how Evan does, but every time that she speaks about him, he becomes more and more a big part of her life. But again, for the first time, I really felt it when she talked about why Connor meant something to her, and when Evan says, "Why do you even care? You didn't know him?" And she's like, "Because I feel lonely as well." For the first time, I think I really understood Alana. I think Vivian's performance unlocked something in her for me. However, and this is possibly another frivolous note, she is dressed far too nicely, by which I mean she looks really stylish and really popular. She looks like a plastic from Mean Girls. She has these high-waisted jeans and skirts and these little cute cropped jumpers. She does not look like a high school loner. She does not look like someone who is really committed to these academic pursuits and these extracurriculars. She looks far too nice. She looks far too stylish for us to understand that that's who she is as a character. And these kind of tropes do matter when you are depicting high school students in cliques. But I think those are all of my thoughts on the Evan Hansen tour, and there are a lot of people who are still going to see this and really enjoy it. And I think fans of the show are going to find it similar enough to the original version that they're still able to go and enjoy it. So if you're watching this concerned that like you really loved Dear Evan Hansen in the West End and you're worried they've ruined it, it is so similar that I don't think that need be a concern of yours. I'm excited for a version of this show where they feel like they can reinvent it a little more, where it can depart more from the original version, and I do enduringly feel like this feels a little bit emotionally watered down. This feels a little bit like Disney Channel original movie. It feels a little bit one-dimensional, but like I said, it was starting to find more of that weight, more of that gravity in the second act. There is still a lot of strength to these performances. I would still encourage people to go and see the show, because I still think it's a very strong piece of musical theatre. It's still got a great book. It's still got a great score. If you've never seen it before, go and see it for yourselves. If you've seen the West End version and you don't know how to feel about this one, then I dare say you will enjoy this one as well. But let me know if you've already seen it at Nottingham Playhouse, or if you end up seeing it along its tour dates in the UK. Let me know what you thought of the show in the comments section down below. Did it make you cry? Did it make you laugh? Do you agree with any of the points that I made here? Do you disagree? Let us know all your thoughts and feelings in the comments. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe to my Theatre Themed YouTube channel if that is where you are watching this review. If you are listening to me on a podcast platform, make sure to follow me there as well, and go find me all across the internet at MickeyJoTheatre. Also, if seeing and listening to me on your phone is not enough for you, you can see me in person this coming Sunday, the 22nd of September at the Phoenix Arts Club in London, where I will be hosting Mickey Jo Live, joined by some very exciting guests. And if you're not able to make it to London, you can also watch via live stream. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching. Have a stagey day. Subscribe!